to love as well. Love is another one of those words that people throw around and have all sorts of meanings for it, and oftentimes it seems to represent the self needs as opposed to something else. How would you describe the force or the what love what it is at a deeper level?
Yeah, well, I struggled for a very long time to find a succinct expression for that, particularly since there are so many contexts in which we see I love this and I love that, and there is the love of our country and the love of the world and the love of nature and the love of our puppies and the love of our parents and the love of our children and our sweetheart. It's such an enormous variety of things of which we say we love. And so I really, this was one of the great intellectual struggles in my life, that for years, I would think, I tried to find what do they all have in common. And now, maybe 10 years goes on, I will come to a different formulation, but my present formulation is that whenever you say love, and it is appropriately used, the word, you are talking about a yes to belonging, a lived yes, not just said with the mouth, but you express an existential affirmation of we belong together in very different ways and in very different relationships, but it's always a belonging. And that, I think, could be very helpful also to overcome what you mentioned, the selfishness that is often in love. Of course, love, this yes to belonging, is the condition for happiness. It makes us happy. If we say this yes to belonging radically, we are happy human beings. So there is a certain justified selfishness in it. We want to be happy. But the emphasis is not, I do this because I want to be happy. I do it because I realize that this is what life is all about, to say yes to belonging and to learn to say it in ever new ways.
So are we innately polarized beings where we have this one behavior that seems to be at odds with a part of our nature that seeks something much more, I don't know what you would say, peaceful or aligned? I mean, do you yourself, I mean, you've spoken of yourself as at least dual, because you have a reaction, then you have another part of you that observes it to some degree and says, no, I should possibly approach it like this. Were you born like that? Is that something that's innate in all of us?
It seems to me that we are we are a very young species as far as geological time goes. We are very young. And so we are very fast evolving. And there is still, as you know, we still have the brain of our animal ancestors in there, and that wants to do something. We have our 2 or 3 different brains in us, and there's, with that already, there's a certain polarity, so we want to be of one piece, because we can be happy only if we are of one piece. And I think each one of us struggling with this is part of the basic human struggle to come to a new level, to come to a higher level of that birth process. Something is being born there. We become human. One isn't just human by being born from a human mother. One becomes human, and one doesn't become human alone. We become human as a community. It's always a process of all of us together. So yes, I think it's a step-by-step evolution, and what we feel there as a polarity doesn't need to pull us apart, but needs to be recognized as still a part of our inheritance that we want to integrate.
Integration, that's a great word. It's very interesting though that our struggle with integration seems to this world seems to be our battleground, and everything else gets locked up in it. How do you approach that when you see that, when you hear about oil spills, you hear about loss of species? I mean, how do you deal with that, and how do you understand that?
Well, I allow myself to feel it deeply. I was also brought up in this, to a certain extent. I had wonderful parents and wonderful schools, so I can't complain, but the whole culture was sort of boys don't cry and this sort of thing. And I allow myself nowadays, when I hear of an oil spill, to cry. I just shed tears. And I really allow myself to feel it deeply. And then out of this feeling comes a wanting to help in some way or other. Now, most of the time I can't help concretely in that particular crisis situation that you hear about in the news, but if hearing it in the news raises within me that desire to help and that awareness we all belong together, I will treat the person that sells me something in the store differently, and my family and the brothers with whom I live, and I will just treat them differently if I allow myself to feel that. And since everything hangs together with everything, that will improve the situation.
So do you feel despair? Is that would you say that you feel despair? Sadness is not necessarily despair. Despair is a sense of lostness, I suppose. Are you past that sort of feeling?
Well, despair, I would not say, because despair is
the opposite of hope. And I think hope is absolutely necessary. And by hope I mean that openness for surprise. And that includes that if it comes even worse than I think it is going to come, it will still be for the best. That is the surprise. It's not, to have ideas of the outcome. That's not hope in the spiritual sense. That's hopes. This hope and that hope. And it's very different whether you are a person of hope or a person of hopes. When all the hopes go down the drain, a person who is truly a person of hope is open for surprise that even that will be something good. So that's what we want to cultivate. So, but despair, hopelessness is not despair, rightly understood. When we say this situation is hopeless, there's a joke that in a situation in which the Austrians have always jokes in which they compare themselves to the Germans, and I am an Austrian, so we tell this joke in a situation in which the Germans say, this situation is serious but not hopeless. The Austrians will say, this situation is hopeless but not serious. So we are always open for surprise, open for hope, and that's, I think, what we want to cultivate.
That's great. So you have I saw a bit of your TED Talk, and you mentioned the line, the gift of a given moment. And I guess that's the trick, hey? To actually be in the moment without projecting a future and reflecting a past and making a decision. Is that what you would say that really we all have to get to as a species?
Yes, I really believe that. And I think that Eckhart Tolle, with this very well-known book, The Power of Now, which I always recommend to everybody. I say, if you have only enough money to buy one book, don't buy my book, buy The Power of Now, because it's such an important book. And what Eckhart Tolle has there presented in The Power of Now is kind of a summary of what many different spiritual traditions have said in their own way, and he puts it across very well in contemporary terminologies, are easy to understand. It's a very, very important book. And that now is really, if you look carefully, is not in time. You see? But we usually think that now is a little stretch within that long line of time that comes from the past and leads into the future. But if it's a little stretch of time, you can cut it in half, and half is not because it's no longer, and the other half is not because it's not yet. And you can cut it and cut it and cut it as long as it is any stretch. And that mental experiment can help you realize that now is not in time, but rather you can turn it around and say, time is in the now, because the past, when we experienced it, was now, and the future, when it comes, will also be now. So time is in the now, and when I learn to live in the now, then I learn to live in something that is beyond time. That is the important thing for every one of us, because sooner or later our time is up,
Right.
and what then?
Right.
Then I must be at home in the now, and the now doesn't pass away, and that is actually a definition for eternity. St. Augustine defined eternity as the now that doesn't pass away. And the now never passes away. And to learn to be at home there, that is really a great task for our human life.
That's the paradox, isn't it? In a way, that's the integration of everything, isn't it? To actually, the experience of a moment is not the same thing as an understanding of it in a linear sequence.
All the great things in life we can't understand in a linear sequence because they are not linear. That's the point.
Yeah.
So we can't grasp them, but we can enter into them. Just like you will never understand what swimming is unless you go into the water and swim.
Right.
But you can read any book you want to read about swimming and look at people swimming, and you never know. You can't grasp it from the outside, but you can do it.
Right. Isn't that in a way, as a conscious entity? I mean, don't you find it an interesting world that you're presented in, where it's almost like it's a created world of linear sequences that everybody's following these paths, and it's so odd when you contrast it with the reality that you understand. How do you resolve the fact that you're in an insane world in a way? Do you know what I mean?
I can't resolve it intellectually, but
Right.
we resolve it simply by doing it.
Right, and laughing, right?
Yeah. Laughter is an important thing.
So, what do for you? There's a certain questions that I'm asking everybody, and I'm contrasting your answers with, let's say, a billionaire, capitalist, to all these different, to scientists. I'm contrasting different opinions on the same subjects. So I'd like to ask you, for you personally, what is the most important thing about being alive, from the point of view of what you're trying to focus your attention on?
I think I can say that easily with one word. It's living gratefully, gratitude, gratefulness. That is the most important thing, because that is the key to a joyful life. It presupposes awareness. It presupposes, the method for it is this stop, look, go. So grateful living is happy living. And we all know people who have everything they would need to be happy, and they are not happy because they are not grateful. That's the only thing they are lacking. And we also know people who have lots of problems and have a life that we would not like to live, and yet they are radiantly joyful because they are grateful. So gratitude.
And do you have epiphany moments where all of a sudden an understanding solidified and your perception of things changed from then on, or has it been a gradual turning?
For me, really, things came very, very gradually. I do not remember any such epiphany moments. Maybe they were there, but I think I would remember them. I remember it more my whole life as a kind of gradual unfolding, very organic, and I've been very blessed. I have not been sick very much. That's an enormous blessing at my age. but I think things more or less unfolded gradually. I can point to catalysts and things that have people and things that have helped me. I had very loving parents, and I had a wonderful school. I had also very difficult experiences, I think, that help one to be grateful. For instance, I lived through World War II, and there were many days when we really thought we would starve to death. So that there's anything to eat, that is still a miracle for me. I always eat everything that's on my plate. It's so clean, you hardly need to wash it, because it's such a joy, and you're so grateful for having anything. So also the negative experiences can contribute to making you what you are.
Well, it sounds like in a way the negative experiences are what contributed to make us what we are. Is in a way, is that why the world reflects such a discordant place for us? Is that how we have to arrive at self-consciousness?
I would say both, the negative and the positive.
Right.
The negative wakes us up, and the positive shows us the direction in which we can go. And for the positive, we often have to look at the many little things. The bad ones are so obvious. You mentioned oil spill and many other big things that happen. But when you think, for instance, after an oil spill, how people put their lives on the line to help the animals, and how it arises the enthusiasm of people to go there and to help and so forth. Those little individual acts of courage and of generosity. I think if we focus on those, there's a lot of positive too.
So were you always kind of curious? It sounds like you started off with a philosophical nature very early and went into kind of a religious, spiritual direction. But were you born that way, or was there something that sort of shifted where you decided, where you had a different self-reflective perspective?
I think I was from the very beginning self-reflective, yes, and like to dream and daydream and this sort of thing. Yes, that was always so. But I did not, from the beginning, want to become a monk. That was not my idea. In fact, at the point, I can still very clearly remember practically the day. I have forgotten the date, but the year, and it was in the summer of '46, and I knew very clearly at that point that that was my way, that I should really, that's how I would become happy. I had read the rule of St. Benedict, and there is this sentence in it: "You have death at all times before your eyes." That is something to help you live fully, to have death before your eyes. And when I read that, I remembered that we had death before our eyes all the time as I was growing up, because the bombs were falling left and right, and then later on our friends were killed in action and left and right and so forth. So we had death at all times before our eyes, and then the war was over, and so I realized that if I had death at all times before my eyes, I could live as happily as I lived then, and as aware and as awake and so forth. And so I knew I should become, always thought of a Benedictine monk, but I ran away from it, and I ran away for 7 years, and then I went from Europe to the United States, and I thought that was pretty safe there. I didn't even know there were monasteries. And then I ran right away into that monastery, into the arms of the monastery. And that was it. I was there for 24 hours. And I knew that was the place, and I've been a member of the community for 60 years now.
So what was it that attracted you? Was it the capacity to really focus without distraction? The community? Was it all of those things?
I think it's more like if you ask yourself, what was it that attracted you when you met your wife for the first time? There is so much,
right.
and you can't pinpoint it. You could neither then nor now can you say what it really was. It's more like an insight. This is it.
Right.
This is it. You go around as if you're always looking for something and you don't even know what you're looking for. And then when you see this is it. And that's it.
Right.
So I was very lucky to have it so simple, relatively, you know. Other people go from one monastery to the other and look. I never looked at any other monastery. That was it.
So do you think that these old religions, it seems to me that a lot of them have sort of remained static, but actually not just remain static, maybe they don't even adhere to their original premise. How do you rate the way traditional religions are relating to the world today? How do you understand that?
What helps me very much in looking at that situation is to make a distinction between the religious tradition and the religious institution.
Right.
The religious traditions are alive and lively, and you can come to them. But of course, once a religious tradition has a large number of followers, necessarily it has to be institutionalized somehow. And we know from institutions, from all institutions, not only the religious ones, but the educational ones, the political ones, the medical ones. You think of any institution, they are always founded for a particular purpose, and necessarily so. And after a relatively short time, they seem to forget that purpose, and they simply become self-perpetuating, and they're only interested in themselves, in being distinct from others, and that happens to all institutions. So the institutions are a necessary evil. On the other hand, it is the institutions that bring us the traditions also. I speak of this original enthusiasm that comes with Muhammad or with Jesus or with Buddha or with any of the great founders, like a volcanic eruption, you know, the light and heat and fire is coming out. And then it starts hardening and it flows down on the side of the mountain, and after a relatively short time it looks just like a rock. It isn't fire at all. And then again and again you have to come to the original fire that is still alive and still burning in every one of the traditions.
It won't be much longer. I appreciate your time. You're wonderful to speak with. Thank you.
Thank you. I enjoy your questions.
Thank you. Good.
Where are you, by the way?
I'm in Vancouver.
In Vancouver, my goodness, this is incredible.
So one extreme to the other, or one end of the earth to the other. It's pretty cool, actually. In some ways, technology is a wonderful. It's a wonderful thing, right?
Yes, wonderful, miraculous.
Yeah. So, how would you personally identify yourself? Like, how do you identify yourself as a being?
Well, we always identify ourselves in relationship. Whenever you ask somebody, the answer, I'm sure you have asked it many, many times, the answer is always one of relationship. So there are many different aspects under which I can identify myself. I'm an Austrian, I think that's important. That is, sort of forms me. I'm a member of the Benedictine order. The Benedictines are also typically and very different from others. But ultimately, I like to think of myself simply as a human being. That is my preference. I like to identify myself as a human being in process, becoming a human being. And I can become a human being only through my interactions with all other human beings. That's how you become a human being. So I try to do that as mindfully and as lovingly as I can.
And you have you have relationships with other religious traditions as well. It sounds like you had it with Buddhism and Sufism and Islam. What are they all basically leading to the same place through different directions, or are they all quite unique in what they're actually seeking as an end result?
I think there are, when you come to know the different traditions, and I was very privileged, as you say, in this respect, come to know Buddhism well and other traditions. When you come to know them, you realize that they are still much more different from one another than you first thought. They are very, very different. But you also, the more you come to know them deeply, the more you realize that they are such very, very different expressions of one and the same basic human faith and hope and love. There is a basic human faith, and that is simply trust in life. It's trust in life. And every human being has that. Even if they call themselves atheists or so, they have this trust in life. And life is that great mystery, that it's that which those who worship God worship as God. When Jews or Christians say God is a living God, that doesn't mean somebody there who is alive. That means that mystery, that inexhaustible mystery, has the qualities of life and of aliveness. And every human being has that, because otherwise they would be dead. And with every breath that we take, we express our faith, our trust that we breathe out, trusting that there's something else that we can breathe in. And this basic human trust then expresses itself very, very differently at different times in history, through different cultures, through different founders of religion. And then not only at the beginning, but then these traditions have very different histories, sometimes also antagonism between one another. That antagonism also shapes the traditions. From one point of view, you could simply say that the whole Christian tradition is a Jewish, a development of the Jewish faith. But through the antagonism between the two, they have defined themselves in contrast to one another. So this has happened with other traditions too, and within other traditions. But it seems to me a great gift if you grow up in a tradition, because the tradition has rituals, and for children, rituals are extremely important, and it has clear teachings. And at a certain age, it's very important to have simple rules and simple teachings. This is it, and children want that. And then, of course, we have to not box them in, but leave it open enough so that they can develop and discover more and discover other traditions and so forth. But to grow up in a particular tradition is an enormous help, and to stay in this tradition for the rest of your life is also an incredible gift that life is giving you, if it's possible, because you know it already, and you can never catch up in another tradition in the same way. But we need, whatever tradition we stand in, we need to go so deep into it that we hit that basic human faith that animates them. And then the tradition will not become a hindrance to communication with other human beings, but rather a help. And it ought to be interesting. Look at that. We can be the same and really after the same, basically, and in such different ways. Isn't that fun? Isn't that interesting? We can help one another. We can learn from one another in this way.
So within the Benedictine culture that you are immersed in, have you adopted any Buddhist perspectives into yours, or Sufi perspectives, or are you able to adapt or adopt some of these other perspectives into your own that are unique to their religion?
I would think so. I would think so. It's very difficult to put your finger on it, but there is this attitude in Zen Buddhism, it's Zen Buddhism that I was mostly in contact with, there is this attitude towards life in Zen Buddhism that has influenced me very strongly, and there are many Benedictines, because it's so congenial to the Benedictine tradition, but there are many Benedictines who are very open to Zen and also have that Zen flavor, if you want, and we have a great deal of exchange, by no means the only one there. So it's kind of no-nonsense approach or down-to-earth approach or something like that. That's typical for Zen. Live and don't just talk about it. This one thing. And for Sufis, that great openness to other traditions, that would be something that's very typical for Sufis, and I certainly want to make that my own. Yes, so there are many things that I admire in other traditions, and then if you admire something, you're beginning to imitate it. And I find that it's very well compatible with Benedictine life. Very much so.
So it sounds like Benedictines they're kind of separate in a way. It sounds like you're separated from the whole of the Catholic Church and able to find your own way within a certain structure. Is that correct?
Yeah, there is one great advantage to Benedictines in comparison to other orders. First of all, we are historically the oldest, or one of the oldest, probably the oldest, and we are really not an order in the strict sense, like an army that has a general or so. We are a confederation of monasteries, and the unit for the Benedictine community is your monastery. So it's a network of very small communities, and that is really, to my mind, a pattern that is worth considering for the future of the human race. The great thinker Raimundo Panica, who was a great teacher of mine, whom I admired very much, he died a couple of years ago, and he was always talking about the world of the future and the unity of the human race, and that was his great hope and longing. But he would say the unity that we are looking forward to is not a new Tower of Babel, they all together build this big pyramid.
Yeah.
The new unity will consist in well-trodden paths from house to house. That is what we want for the future. And that comes back to what we said about being truly ourselves, each one of us, and retaining all that we achieved in a couple of thousand years of development, in developing the human person as a value, and the community at the same time. These well-trodden paths from house to house, and the small communities where you still can know everybody, and it's not always easy to live with people with whom you're not really related and you haven't chosen them. It's not so easy, but it's worthwhile.
That is awesome. You answered my last question as well, and that's perfect. We really appreciate it. Thank you so much. It was really a pleasure to talk with you.
Thank you very much, and I really enjoyed it. Wonderful questions, and thank you.